Good morning, everyone. We're privileged here today to have Dr. Ramzi Touchan, an associate research professor at the Lab of Tree-Ring Research at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona. Dr. Touchan is from this area. He's from Syria. His work focuses on integrating...
Half Syrian, half Lebanese.
Mom from Zahli, but that tells you a lot about the forte we have here. Dr. Touchan has been working with dendrochronology and looking at the climate variability in the Eastern Mediterranean. He's had many publications in this area, and his research is ongoing, and he has many projects coming up. One is a major project for this area looking at drought. So we are honored and privileged to have Dr. Touchan here. Before we go along, please, all mobile phones, not on silent, off, because we're recording this on YouTube, and we don't want the buzzing sound to appear. So please switch off your mobile and listen to Dr. Touchan as he's going to go over a broad spectrum of dendrochronology and then its use in dendroclimatology. Please, Ramzi.
Thanks. What I'm going to do in this presentation, first of all, try to introduce you to the science of dendrochronology. What is dendrochronology, application of dendrochronology, and each application I will try to give you an example from my own research or one of my colleagues. And then we will go into a study that funded by NSF, U.S. National Science Foundation, to look at the climate variability by using tree rings. So now we're going to talk about this issue. I hope I don't bother you or make it boring for you guys. So just hang on. First of all, what is dendrochronology? Dendrochronology is a Greek word. Dendron means tree. Then chronology means telling the time. So telling the time from the trees. Okay? The concept is based on, first of all, the annual growth. Do you have an idea about tree rings? Like this, each one of these represent 1 year. The light cells is the growing season during the spring, early growing season. The late dark cells represent the late wood. So a ring consists of early wood and late wood. This is one ring, okay? So each annual ring of these can be assigned to an exact calendar year. Second, the history of changes in the tree environment, which means when you see rings, big rings, narrow rings, these can be reconstructed by using either the whole annual ring or the early wood or the late wood. Okay? If you have any question, shoot. Okay? Now, this is depending on the concept of cross dating. What do we mean by cross dating? The cross dating means you assign a date to a specific year by looking at many trees to decide the age of the ring of what year is that year. For example, this is living trees, okay? These living trees, we know, for example, the outside date here, when they took the sample from the tree, it was, let's say, 1945, okay? Then you can go back, 1945, 43, going back this way in time. We look at these annual rings, the narrow rings, and compare it to other narrow rings in other trees. So we look at this concept, like 1930 is a small ring, but then here we have 1922 and 23 is a small ring. We can decide that because we know that this is a living tree. When we took the sample, it will tell us the exact year, okay? So Then we develop, this pattern, let's say for 20 trees. We take the average of 20 trees and we develop this pattern. And this is what we call a chronology. Okay? Then we go. This is a snag, a dead tree. We don't know the age of this dead tree. Okay? So we take sample of this dead tree and try to match it with the living tree to determine the exact date of that snag. And then what we did here, we cross-dated by looking at these annual rings, the narrow rings, compare them to each other, and then we were able to determine exactly the date of this tree. And not only that, we were able to bridge back in time. We increase our chronology back in time. Okay? The same thing, we have an old building. This is, for example, an old building. You want to decide the age of that building. You don't know what's the age. You take samples from the beams, and you try to cross-date it with those two, and then you can also determine exactly when that building was built, at the same time bridging back in time. Then your chronologies start getting older and older and older. Okay? Now, there is 4 criteria to do cross-dating. First criteria, the trees should produce 1 annual ring every year. Okay? Like if you are in the near the equator, tropical, there is no variation between the annual rings. So you cannot use dendrochronology. There are some areas in the tropic you can use it if it shows kind of variation in the season, but in most cases you need, in order to use cross-dating or dendrochronology, you need to have that the trees produce 1 annual ring every year. The second criteria, it should be influenced by 1 environmental factor. This environmental factor could be precipitation, like in low elevation, or could be temperature in the high elevation or in the Arctic. So the trees has to be influenced by this environmental factor. Or it could be a combination of both, precipitation and temperature. Like there is an index called Palmer Drought Index. It consists of the temperature and precipitation together. So the first one is the annual growth layer of the tree should produce every year 1 annual ring. The second is the environmental factor, influence the growing of the trees. The third one, this environmental factor should change from 1 year to the other. Okay? Let's say if we have a tree, this is in Algeria, in a very near a creek, the condition is perfect, moisture available all the time. So the trees produce annual rings. But look, it's complacent. There is no variation between 1 year to the other. While on a sensitive side, steep slope, shallow soil, you can see when a rain came, you will see the variation in the annual rings. So in our case, we don't look for the rich people. We like the poor people, because when they eat meat, they will feel happy. Then when they don't eat for a while, they will feel it also. So the importance is to look at this environmental factor that influence the tree growth and make a variation. The fourth factor, this limiting environmental factor should be on a larger scale. For example, this is my study in the supported by NSF. This is each one of these points represent 1 site that I collected from Greece, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, all these sites. 1840. 1840 is a dry year all the way. So this means a regional environmental factor. The same thing during the instrumental data, 1949, is spread all over. And I have many events of like this in our study we found. The same example with wet years. You can see 1755, wet in Greece, in Turkey, in Syria, in Lebanon. Okay? So that means it's on a regional scale. Because sometimes I hear this question many times, how do you know, like this narrow ring, for example, is not related to competition or something else? Well, the answer is, if 1755 is spread all over, that means it's related to climate. Okay? The founder of this science in the United States is Andrew Douglas. He was an astronomer. He graduated 1846 and assigned to build an observatory in northern Arizona, Flagstaff, by a famous scientist at that time. His name was Percival Lowell. Okay, so, and Douglas, this is the observatory that was built. Here is Douglas in his 20s. Douglas was interested in sunspot event. And when he went to northern Arizona, he used to wander in the forest. Look at the trees. Cutting, there is a lot of logging, cutting trees. So he started counting rings. He knew, for example, this was cut in 1899. He started counting 1899, 1898, 97. Oh, 1895 is a small ring. Then he went farther. 1885 is a small ring. So then he went to another tree, and he found this concept that I talked about and developed this science. And unfortunately, and he was looking at sunspot event because he thought that sunspot has influence on the climate of the Earth and in relation to precipitation. But unfortunately, he couldn't fulfill his dream because at that time, the instrumental data was short. And he was looking at one side alone. So he couldn't, until recently, there was a study where they took a huge area to compare it and look at the climate in relation to sunspot event. Douglas developed a chronology. He stayed from 1923 to 1929 to build a chronology in relation to archaeological material. To determine the prehistoric side of the Indian, because there was no information about the movement of the Indian in the southwest of the United States. So by looking at tree ring from living trees and related to archaeological site, he was able to develop this chronology, and it was a big event actually in the 1929, and it was published actually in a Journal of Natural Geographic, his finding. Now our lab, I'm not going to go, there is a lot of student of Douglas, but just now I'm going to give you in our lab, there is 12 professors, 7 state funded, 5 partially state and temporary, 6 joint adjunct professors, 8 full-time scientists, 20 graduate students, 2 postdoc, 13 undergrad, 3 to 5 visiting scholar every year. I mean, now it's considered the largest and the first lab in the world. Any person who would like to learn about dendrochronology has to come to our lab. And it's like Mecca of dendrochronology. Okay. And after Douglas, the science spread around from climatology to ecology to using a stable isotope, archaeology, biochemistry, and geology. And I'm going to talk about some application of dendrochronology, such as dendroarchaeology. And I'm going to give a very neat example of the relation of human and dendrochronology and the climate. There was like 27 chronology from the four corners, which is Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. They used what they call principal component analysis. Principal component, I'm going to tell you, it's a statistical analysis, but the idea of the principal component analysis is to determine the regional spatial signal in an area. So they found out by running principal component analysis, this is Northwest. The Northwest is affected by bimodal climate condition, winter precip and summer precip, while the Southeast influenced by unimodal, which is summer precip. And when we run principal component, the first principle clustered this number of chronology, and the second principle clustered this number of chronologies. Okay? The same thing with the climate data, observed data, actual data, it developed the same pattern. Okay? Now, this is from 1966 to 1988. But if you look at principal component period by period, for example, 1250 to 1450, they discovered this pattern was a chaos in the Northwest. The east part stayed the same, the southeast part. But the northwest part, there was more than different pattern appearing. But if you take the whole period, you don't see this chaos. And they discovered during this period where the Anasazi moved out of the region. Why? Because the climate, there was a climate change at that period. And looking at the Colorado Plateau, they found the people, the Anasazi, the Indian, declined. After 1200, look how they declined. Where they concentrated, they went to the Rio Grande in New Mexico, and the population increased there. So this is show you the relationship between climate and human behavior. In addition, archaeology can be used, for example, violin. They will come and tell you this is violin made by very famous artist from 1700 or 1800. And they want to sell it for $1 million. So they can bring it to us, take a piece. We can look at the annual ring. If the annual ring will tell us if this violin for that artist or not, that musician or not. But if it shows us that the annual ring after the 1700, then this is not the correct, they cannot sell it for that price. The same thing with you can look at paintings like Michelangelo or somebody and want to sell this for millions of dollars. You can determine and tell them exactly if this is during the days of Michelangelo or not, if it's a fake or not. So there are many ways you can use dendroarchaeology, actually we call it. The second thing is insect outbreak. You can study insect, the duration of insect, by looking at tree ring. Different kind, the dieback, looking at them, and you can decide how to protect the forest from this insect outbreak. How the manager should do in this forest to protect it, because you will understand the dieback of this insect. How do you do that? Let's say if you have a host tree and non-host tree, you can isolate the factor of the insect from the climate. And you can do that, and you can take just the factor of the insect outbreak. This is, for example, the host tree is, for example, a tree called Douglas fir, Pseudosuca menzii. The non-host tree is Ponderosa pine tree. When you take the sample, if the suppression in the wood related to climate, you can see it from the Ponderosa pine tree because it's not influenced by the insect, okay? But if the factor from the insect, then you will find it. And you can isolate these, and you can look at the duration of the insect outbreak. Fire history. In the Southwest, in the past, fire used to be a surface fire. Fire comes to an area, burn, but it won't kill the tree. Okay? So, but what does it do? It makes scars on the trees. And you can reconstruct the fire. Because in the past, after 1860, before 1860, the fire used to be surface fire because it was open forest. A lightning hit an area, the fire will come, spread, and continue, but never kill the tree. But after 1860, when the Europeans came to the United States, they brought with them their sheep and cattle and start grazing the forest. When they were grazing, they overgrazed the forest. What happened? There wasn't enough grass when a lightning hit, there was no grass enough to carry the fire from one tree to the other. The other factor played is human. Forest Service in the United States considered the fire is the enemy of the forest. So they suppressed fire. They suppressed fire, then what happened after 50 years, accumulation, a lot of debris accumulated in the forest. In the 1970-80, what happened when a lightning hit a forest, it made a crown fire, burning thousands of hectares. So the Forest Service, they wanted to know how the fire behaved in the past. So they wanted to mimic the past. To do that, they wanted to use tree ring to study how the fire behaved in the past. And this is how the fire used to behave in the past. You see, each one of these is a fire scar. And you can see the fire frequency here. Determine this fire frequency. Look, after 1896, there is no fire. You see, this is influence of human being. While the fire, actually, it's not the enemy of the forest. The fire is a good friend for the forest. Because when a fire hit the pine trees, it regenerates the trees. At the same, the sequoia, giant sequoia, the redwood, if you know about them, they want their seed, they won't germinate unless there is a fire. And not only you can determine the year of the fire, you can determine the season of the fire. Which season the fire happened. And you can see, we can determine if it happened in the early growing season, the middle of the growing season, or late or dormant season. This information is very important. Based on that, I did my postdoctorate, actually, on fire history in New Mexico. The idea is to look at fire, because fire managers, they want to understand how to mimic the past. In order to mimic the past, we need to give them a kind of prescription. Like, you need to do a fire every 5 years in this forest, or 6 years. But that's not enough. We need to tell them also there are other factors play around. Climate, anthropogenic factor, topography. So they need to understand, not all the pine forests, you can give them the same kind of prescription to do prescribed burning. Because like in the Ponderosa pine forest, they will say, you need to make a prescribed burning every 5 years in order to have an open forest, not to have a crown fire. Okay? So I developed reconstructed fire from 10 sites. Each one of these represent one side, each line. Each line has 20 to 30 trees. Each one of these represents a fire year, the red one. And look at the synchrony in the fire event. In addition, some areas, the fire frequency declined earlier in the 1700. So I came with the idea at that time, maybe grazing has an influence on that. They told me you are not. So that's not true. So we went and we looked historically, and we found that this area exactly was the first Spanish ranch they built, allotment for grazing. And that's the reason this side, the fire frequency declined earlier. Okay. The same thing we did it in the mixed conifer forest, the high elevation forest. Also, we looked at the fire frequency in that. So we have the lower elevation and the higher elevation. And here I did, this is a paper I published in the 1994. I looked at 3 sites to tell my hypothesis is correct. I took a site that had been the grazing start in the 1890s, and the site the grazing start early in the 1700s, and the site never been grazed because it's on a lava flow. Nobody can reach that area. And look at the fire frequency here declined late in the 1800s. Here start decline in the 1700s. Here the fire never stopped. Okay? So based on this, in addition, I looked at the relation between climate and fire by running what they call Monte Carlo simulation model, 1,000 simulation, and we looked. This is the Ponderosa pine forest. In order to have a fire, this is the fire year. The 0 represents the fire year. When you have a fire year, a dry year, you will have a fire year in the lower elevation forest. But there is a catch here. You need 2 to 3 years prior to the fire to have enough moisture to build the understory in order when you have a dry year, you will have a fire. Because if you will have in the lower elevation, you will have a fire every year, it won't spread around because there isn't enough grass to carry the fire from one tree to the other. So you need enough moisture to build this bridge to spread the fire. While in the high elevation, it doesn't matter. You can have fire every year because it's wet over there. All the time there is available grass. So you see, how do we think? We take it from different aspects. Then based on this information, you can give it to natural water fire manager how to use this information to do prescribed burning. The other studies is related to isotope, looking at carbon-13, 12 ratio, and look at, for example, wet event. The uncertainty in the wet event in our region is very high. With looking at isotopic analysis, you can have a better idea. Another study, which is my colleague started, is looking at cancer. Some area in the southwest, they have leukemia. So they wanted to know if tree ring can help them with that. And they, with the tree ring, they looked at certain kind of metal, and they noticed if this like ligustine or copper increased in that area where the cancer start, that means that's the relation. And this is a new concept now appearing by using dendrochronology in cancer studies. The other one is flood event. Flood is like fire. You can study flood by, like when you have a flood, it will carry all these rocks and it will hit the trees. When it will hit a tree, it will make an injury in the tree. By looking at these, you see, it's like fire. You can determine the flood in this region and how to deal with this flood. Each year of this represents the flood year. And you can reconstruct the flood and give natural resource, water resource manager this information.
How can you tell if this is done by a flood?
Because, first of all, it's inside the area of the flood. Second, the it doesn't show like a charcoal. In the fire scars, you will see charcoal. Do you want me to go back, show you? Yeah, that's the difference. The other neat study is about reconstructing stream flow. In the 1920s, the Colorado River, maybe you heard about it, some of you guys. The Colorado River passed 7 states in addition to Mexico. So they wanted to distribute the stream flow of the Colorado River to all these states. And they took the data from the gauges, instrumental data, actual data, from 1900 to 1922, okay? And they calculated, found that the stream flow of the Colorado River is 19 billion cubic meter, okay? After a while, they discovered that they were in shortage of water. So our colleague, Charles Stockton, he did a study in the 1970s. He took tree ring chronologies from the upper Colorado and the lower Colorado and made a relationship between the ring width and the stream flow. And he discovered that the period that they chose, between 1900 to 1922 is the most humid period of the river. So instead, the stream flow to be 19 billion cubic meter, it was 13 billion cubic meter based on 500 years of reconstruction. Okay? So this information was very useful to natural resources, water resource managers to distribute this information.
Now I can understand how he can tell a wet year from the rings.
Mm-hmm.
How can he tell the volume of flow in the river from the rings?
Because because when you are comparing the actual data, you are then extrapolating the past. So each year will become like a value. Okay?
Isn't that affected by how much tree cover there was, how much forest was covered?
Well, that's the reason I answered you. You remember I said the regional distribution? It's you try to isolate the climate factor, leave the climate factor and took the other factor. We will talk about it. I will show you now. Okay? Now, I'm going to just give you an overview about dendroclimatology in the region. Brian Bannister. He used to be, he was one of Andrew Douglas students. He was the director of our lab for 17 years. And he was the first dendrochronology to attempt systematic tree ring sampling in the Middle East. And, okay, Bannister dated archaeological material in Turkey from tombs. And he was from Egyptian coffins. and he told me a very neat story, how the Lebanese were very smart people, long time ago, and know how to make merch, you know, buy and sell. They sold the Egyptian, they told them for their coffin, wood, they call it cedrus, from Cedrus Libani wood. So they asked him to come and look at this, date this wood for them. And he discovered that it was juniper. So instead of, because cedar is more expensive than the juniper. So from that time they know how to do business.
Actually, back then, the juniper was a much better wood than the cedar.
Yeah, but was more expensive, the cedar.
And there is a story that tells that they were confusing, I don't know how much were they confusing the different species. But one thing for sure, they were always selling cedar for sacred uses.
Mm-hmm.
But for wood structures, they were selling anything.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the reason why the Egyptians, they wanted the cedar for their coffins, you know, because it will last very long and keep. So this is one of his neat stories. And he was actually, Brian Bannister, the first person who sampled in Lebanon.
He was in AUB.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And he encouraged me actually to continue my research which I was very interested, because this is my region, you know. So this is an overview of dendroclimatology. After the Bannister, dendroclimatology, you know, it's in a very recent studies happened of dendroclimatology. Studies, first of all, by Christian Wengner. He looked at the relation between tree ring and climate. Then followed by people from Israel, from Syria, Chalabi and Martini. But all their study was just looking at the relation between tree ring and climate. Okay? Then it was followed by one of my colleague, Yunal Ekmek. Also in the 2000s, he came and he spent with me 6 months sabbatical. The relation between climate and tree ring. Hughes et al. Did another study about climate and tree ring using archaeological material. Then D'Arijo and Collin from Lamont, Dorothy, Columbia University. She wanted to be the first one who reconstruct the climate in Turkey, so she used actually the data of one of our colleagues. His name is Peter Cunningham. She used his data to make a reconstruction of climate, but her reconstruction ended in 1980 because he didn't collect after that. Okay, so. Then Ekmek followed another study, 2000. Then Carol Griggs from Cornell University, her PhD I was on her PhD on reconstructed May-June precipitation in the North Asian. Now, I started, this was my first study and the first actually reconstruction of precip for the Middle East. I started this study in 1994. Okay? Why I wanted to do that? You know, water is the main factor that influences our region. One day the water will be more important than oil. Okay? And our climate data is short. The continuous climate data are very short. Actually, if you take a continuous high-quality climate data, maybe you can start 1924. But if for a water resource manager, natural resource manager, if he will take this information to put them in their plan for 4 or 5 years, might be biased, because maybe this 50 years could be the most humid period, or it could be the most driest period. But if you have other proxy records like tree that you can go in time 400 or 500 years, then your interpretation will be on a more solid outcome. Your result will be much better when you put your plan. Okay? So at that time, the NSF gave me $6,000 to make a visit to Jordan, just to start, meeting with people and make relation in order to do. But as a dendrochronology, all the time, wherever you travel, you have your gun with you, the increment borer. So I couldn't, so we went sampling, And I collected from northern Jordan and southern Jordan. The northern Jordan were Pinus halepensis, Aleppo pine, and Quercus oak trees. From southern Jordan, there were the Juniperus phoenicia. In Arabic, they call it arar. Do you call it arar? In Jordan, they call it arar. I know you have an excelsa. The relation in the pine in relation to climate was excellent relationship, but they were short. And look at the relationship between them, except these two outliers. I went to the historical, to the climate data. I found that 1963, 64, and 65, big storms happened, one of them in December, the other in January. Big storm, 60% of the precip filled, and it was like a huge runoff. So the trees didn't take those, okay? So if I take these two outliers, I will have almost 0.8 here, relationship between climate and tree ring. But you have to keep it because this is fact in the region. And I was able to reconstruct the climate from October to May, okay? Now, just get something here. And I reconstructed the climate back to 1600 AD, okay? As I told you, we took the climate data, the actual data. If we have a good relationship with the tree ring data, we extrapolate to the past and build our reconstruction. And this is the threshold. This is arbitrary threshold. We took 80% of the mean of the actual data and considered our threshold, and 120% of the mean for the wet event. And with anything below that is dry years, anything higher than that is wet years. And we wanted to see other proxy record might help us to see if our work is correct or not. And one of them is we looked at historical documentation, for example. Like 1621, it says there was a famine in Syria because it was very dry. 1625, drought, few drops of rain during the winter in the shores of old Syria. Tripoli, June, Hussein, and Baalbek were attacked by locusts. You see, we try to use other proxy records to make our reconstruction stronger. Okay. Now, we wanted to see probabilities of drought. How this drought, every how many years, drought will hit the region. What is the longest period of drought? We found out in Jordan, southern Jordan, 1 year, 2 years, 3 year drought, it's almost 100. We run 1,000 simulation on our reconstruction. The 1, 2, and 3 years, you will have it for sure. 4 years, out of 1,915 times you will have drought. 5 years, 50-50. More than 5 years, it's rare. What does that mean? If you are a water resource manager, you want to use this information. Because what happened in our region, when we hit by drought, then we start talking about it, we make conferences, we pay thousands of dollars to make these conferences. We don't look behind our nose. Even in the United States, the same concept. But with this information, you can determine, okay, I will have maximum drought is 5 years. In this case, I need to reserve water in case if I was hit by 5 years, I will be ready. Okay? So this is one of the application, how to, and this publication, we publish it in American Water Resources, and it was actually chosen by the United Nations as one of the best paper of 1999. I received demand for this paper from all over the world, except where? Jordan never asked me. Where the study, was based there. When they asked me, when they were hit by the 5-year drought. When they were hit by the 5-year drought, they look, oh, this study was in the Ministry of Agriculture. Then they say, oh, we helped in this study. I have an old TV interview. They show it to the king and start talking about it, translate it to English and to Arabic, and it was sitting on their desk, maybe dust over it also. Now, after this $6,000, we get our project from NSF to do about our regional study. It was the idea is to start the study in Turkey, Syria, Jordan, and then I extended to Lebanon, Greece, and Cyprus. They gave me enough money to do the study. And I was helped by my colleague and friend, Fadi Asmar, Jean Stefan, and Mr. Ghattas Agil to do my research here. And we built 46 chronology from the whole region. The objective of the study, first of all, to see if we can use dendrochronology in those regions. Second, if we can, then is this chronology similar to another chronology in Greece? Is this chronology related to other chronology in Turkey? This chronology here, which is like 700 kilometers, is there a relationship? If there is the climate is the factor? If they are, then that is climate. And so we looked at all these regions together from different species, from pine to cedrus to juniper to different kind of species from the region. And the way we take the sample, we core the trees. From one side, two cores we take from each tree. We take 20 trees to 25 trees, like 40 samples. Sometimes from dead material, we take cross-section. Okay. Sometimes if a dead material standing, snag, we try to make a pie cut. We leave the snag standing, but we take a sample out of it. This is the sample. After you cut them, you sand them, then you start dating those samples. Oh, sorry. It's the same from pine trees. Then what we do, after to build the chronology, we do what they call standardization. The standardization concept, just take it this way. You need to remove other factors like competition, age, and keep the climate factor. At the same time, you make, by running a curve, you fit a curve in the ring width in order to make the mean stable and the variance stable here and the same variance. Then you can compare between trees because the variance in this area is different from this area. So standardization would take care of all this business. And we were able to go back. This is all the chronologies we developed from the region. The oldest is in Turkey, 1017 AD. Old. And we had a problem with the sensitivity, missing rings. Sometimes it's very dry, you don't see the rings. So you need many samples in order to find the missing rings. And we did a reconstruction by using May to August period. And we found out that the relationship is very strong. 50% of the variance say that it's related to climate. This is a very high value for us. So based on that, we were able to reconstruct the climate and go back to 1400 AD. And then I developed another reconstruction from juniper, goes back to 1097 AD. And let's go back. So based on that, we looked at the drought event related to historical documentation, and we discovered how many years of drought will hit this region. What do you need to do as a water or natural resource manager to study your water resources, your natural resources, how to build your agricultural, based on the water you have. What do you need to do? It's not just, we are sitting here making research and sitting away, in our, 15th floor as if we are away from people. No, we try to apply it and relate it to reality. What does it mean for water natural resource people? In conclusion, this technique is valuable to study past climate variability. Understanding past climate, important for managers of water, agriculture, and other resources, because it will help them to implement low-risk, long-term plans to achieve conservation and sustainable use of water and other natural resources. This is our new, another funding from NSF to continue our work in Cyprus, Turkey, Greece, and Lebanon. And we would like to collaborate with our colleague here to continue building our chronologies in these regions. Those boxes represent the empty that we need to fill. Then we can make what they call a climate-filled reconstruction of a drought. You can look at the drought from Greece all over to Lebanon by building a big network from tree ring and then make a regional reconstruction of the climate and give a better understanding of a drought through time. Okay? Also, that's what I was talking about, building this climatic reconstruction, high resolution actually, in order to... Then the other part is what factors influence the climate? What kind of atmospheric circulation that cause drought in Syria or Lebanon or Jordan? Or we're gonna go into a detailed study on how to look at by looking at the atmospheric circulation of the climate. You see, we started the concept from one tree to two trees, one side of 20 trees, two sides from different country to another country, until you build, then you look at the big picture. What's the relationship of climate, atmospheric circulation? What's the influence from Europe or from United States influence the climate here? Like now there is a very, very recent study in Science showing you that in the Southwest, the drought that influenced the Southwest is influenced also mid-latitude. You know, and there is a gap need to be built. And I'm looking for a bright student to work with us on this subject. I know all of you bright guys. And then use this data and relate it to archaeological, historical documentation, other proxy record. For example, use isotopes, use sediment studies. Try to build from different proxy record and correlate it. But the most accurate is the tree ring, because tree ring gives you exact calendar year. This is my publication, if you need any of them. I'm not going to go further because we have other study we did in North Africa. We produced 2 nice papers now from NSF also. One of them was chosen the editor choice of Science. And this is publication. If you are interested, just email me. And this is my whole network between Middle Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa. This is some pictures with John Stefan, our guys here when we did our study in Lebanon. This is one of my students. This is from Syria, and John finished his PhD. He's from Lebanon. He's in the Ministry of. And this is in Jebel Bshiri. We sampled there from Cedrus. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Touchan. I just want to remind you something. I missed something in the opening. Our host here, when the landscape design and ecosystem management department of Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences and the Assam Ferris Institute. It's through their good offices that we have Dr. Touchan here. So, and as part of the Assam Ferris Institute, we have a forum on climate change and the environment in the Arab world. And this fits parts of the series of lectures that we're doing. So there's a good confluence here of teaching and research and public policy that comes together, and this is what should enrich you guys, and you have to take advantage of this. Hopefully we'll have many more of these series that you can come and enjoy as part of your learning and as part of your experience at AUB. So if you have any questions for Dr. Touchan, please go ahead. It's your opportunity.
Are you considering using archaeological samples to
Oh,
push
yeah.
back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You already have in the archaeological field a lot
Right.
of chronology.
Now, actually, we're going to we submitted just a pre-proposal. I don't know if you know Stuart Manning.
Yes.
Stuart is now he is the head of the Cornell tree ring lab. And he contacted me, and we submit a pre-proposal, and we will have 4 graduate students, anybody interested, postdoctoral, to do. And we're going to look at the Mediterranean, part of the Mediterranean basin, using tree ring from living dead material and archaeological material. And there is a gap between 1000 AD to like 850 AD. We need to fill this gap. If we fill this gap, that will be a new discovery. Actually, we can go back to very historical period. And now we are in the process, we're going to hear if we, and it's going to be like $1 million study. Then we have another study we're going to submit to the European Union, looking at the whole Mediterranean basin. And this one, we are waiting for the EU to open the...
The world is warming up. I just wonder whether you are able to take this trend in the tree rings also.
My last study in Morocco, the one I did on Cedar Lebanese, Cedar Atlantica, and Pinus helipensis, I found that the last 20 years is, in terms of precip I'm talking here, it's the driest 20 years from 1271 AD till present. Okay? That's the paper where Science, it was the editor choice of Science. And we did a study to look at if there is a climate change or increase in temperature. We did a study in 1994 in Siberia, because in the Arctic, if there is a climate change, it will appear there. And we found out, like the hockey stick, from 1950, in the 20th century, jump up like this. There is a trend going up. And we are saying this is related to climate change. But the oil companies, they were saying, no, they were, like, you know, when they start talking about the cigarette, it causes cancer, all these cigarette factories make their own research. Oh, no, this is not true. Now, they jumped on my colleague. I was part of this study. And they made a hearing in the Congress for him that this is not true. They wanted all the data, you know. But then, that was it's the real case, you know.
Can we go back to the map that you showed last, where you had the region divided into 6 different sub-regions?
This one?
What are the
Oh, okay. This one.
Well, it is my understanding here that the surface ocean movement of the wind is, I mean, the question is, I don't understand why you should include Greece, or why would you include Greece and the region in the 5, or labeled 5 in this study, because I don't know. I'm not
Okay.
understanding exactly.
Well, this is a normal question. Believe me, in my NSF review, you know, NSF, they are the reviewers are, you know, terrible. I mean, they look into the microscope. And one of the, why do you need more sample?
No, I'm saying that the
Oh,
climate
yeah.
in
The reason, yeah, but
in the region labeled 5 here
because,
is expected to be different from the Levant region.
yeah, because here, most of our samples here is influenced by the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
We need to see if we go up there, have a different signal, because we are looking for a winter signal. It's important to have a winter because we have a summer signal. And like we need to look at the Northern Isolation Index. We found the Northern Isolation Index with other data was very poor because the Northern Isolation is a winter signal. While we have a summer signal, it was related to another atmospheric circulation called East Atlantic Jet. Okay? But the reason we are putting all this area because the instrumental data is not available on big scale. So what we need to do, we need to build this by using proxy record from training. Then that will be our climate for the whole region, because this is a huge area. And here also, I put 1 point here, but here there's a lot of need to be done, because I just collected 2 sides here.
What is the particular climate factor that you took?
In this case here, precip is the main factor.
And you excluded the temperature?
No, no. What we do, let me show you a figure. It's from, I took those out. But I want to take you to a figure that will give you an idea of how do we do that. We do what they call response function analysis. The response function analysis, you take the tree ring chronology and you put precip and temperature. And you look for 14 months. What's the factor influencing the tree ring growth? And you notice the temperature is not a factor here. The precip is the factor. Okay? So we determine which factor we will use by running response function analysis to understand. Like in North Africa, we found, for example, this is Palomar drought index. Palomar drought index is a combination of water, precip, and temperature, and soil moisture, soil structure. Okay? And this is what they call PDSI, Palomar Drought Index. It's a drought index. Why did we use Palomar Drought Index? We did it after we did it on precip and temperature. And we found out that the precip and temperature play a factor in the growth of the trees. Then we said, okay, if that's the factor, why don't we use Palomar Drought Index? Because
Yes, and in the model, when you do the Monte Carlo simulation, you just include the two factors that you're talking about.
yeah, like when we did the Monte Carlo simulation, I didn't want to get into that detail. It was the first time we did this analysis, actually. What we did, we took the error between the actual precip and the tree ring, okay? We took that error with the mean, and we ran 1,000 time, and we include this error every time in the period prior to the instrumental data. Let's say our instrumental data from 1945 to present, we took those errors, we included from 1600 to 1944. And we have 1,000 reconstruction with the error inside it, okay, to determine the drought event.
Back to basis, what about sunspot?
Well, I told you sunspot, we found a relationship, but weak. It wasn't, that strong because it needs a huge network to determine. Because in sunspot, you have two cycles, 11-year cycle and 21-year cycle. And in order to do it, you need to compare it to this tree ring network.
It should be easier to find out, since we can sample just the younger trees, or we don't need to go as back in times as...
No, it's important to go back in time to see. First of all, it's important during the instrumental data.
Yes.
Then you can go back in time. And there's a study being done, and they found there is a relationship, and they published the paper, but, it's an okay relationship, but it's not, very high, like what you find with our data here. But it has a factor influence the climate of the Earth.
There's also another, when I look at the map of, you just showed of the instrumental, and there's the factor of volcanic ashes that...
Oh, yeah.
So we should need also...
Oh, yeah, we study these. Actually, there is I didn't put that, our colleague look at frost event in relation to the volcanic eruption. And this is one of our work. Have a question?
So what data gaps are there, and for how much further to the future can you use this technique to give us insights about global warming in this region?
Well, this is a very delicate question. You see, I don't want to predict in the future. You see.
You cannot predict in the past. I mean, the
No, in the past you can, because you have data, you can extrapolate to the past because you have enough data. But in the future, you don't know. You don't have something to relate it to. But you can, what you can do, you can say, okay, listen guys, this is kind of probability. I can give you this probability. 50%, 20%. Look at even the forecaster. They tell you tomorrow there will be a rain, then suddenly there is no damn rain. How can you predict it 50 to 100 years in advance? But what they are doing now, this is not my job. There are programmers now. They're trying to put a lot of proxy record together and try to predict to the future. My job is, I'm an, like a person who records for you situation, give you exact information, then you as a modeler, you can use it the way you want. But there are many attempts to do that now, and they are doing it, to look about this event in the future. But what I did in my case, I looked at probability during my instrumental data and back in time because I have the trees. I don't have the trees to the future yet.
I have a question here. You know how sometimes, let's say during an El Nino year, we start by getting maybe a couple of droughts in the southwestern U.S. and then a year or two later we might get a drought here or a flood in Ethiopia or something. Has somebody tried to correlate between what we see in the Middle East and what we see at other places in the world and maybe see if we can have like a warning signal that, guys, this is coming. Because we got a drought over there, because of these weather conditions or whatever, we might have something.
And that's the study was done by Seeger, by running this programming, modeling, and relate. There is a connection between ENSO in the Southwest, in the United States, and here. There are some areas influenced by the ENSO in this region, but need more work, you know. With all what I collected, I'm still not convinced to do this atmospheric global, you know.
Because you want more NSF money?
No, this is not correct. Actually, you know, let me tell you something. I don't get one penny for myself.
Yeah, I know that.
You know, I don't get one penny even salary for myself. I do it because I believe in what I'm doing.
So why are you hesitating to go a step forward and try to start?
Because I need the money. I cannot spend my own pocket to...
I mean, to compare the data over all this area with the atmospheric situation.
We did. I didn't go into that because he told me he want the presentation to be, you know, very, you know, light.
But light, this is the light version. Accessible.
I can give you a whole presentation about our result with the atmospheric circulation, what we did, but it's not enough because you need more sight to build the big picture. Do you know in the Southwest to do this atmospheric, how many sites they develop? There is almost 600-700 chronologies in the region. And if you compare the Southwest to the Middle East, to our region where I'm doing Greece, this region, I will need 150 chronologies.
Since this is a forum on global warming and CO2 and all that stuff, there is some work right now being done all over the world trying to associate between plant physiology, growth rate, and actually CO2 abundance in the atmosphere. And the idea is the more CO2 we have, the bigger our rains. And we do know that during all different periods in history, we've had like when big-scale agriculture started, we cut down a lot of forest, we got CO2 in Krakatoa, etc. Do you find that you can actually date CO2 how can we say it? Like maybe take glacier samples or glacier core samples.
Yeah, you take
and
you
you can see it in your trees, and that will allow us maybe to forecast what's going to
that's the reason there is ice cores.
Exactly.
And there's other proxy. That's the reason now our study. I'm involved in a study with the European Union, looking at the climate through the last millennium.
So there is a possibility of actually.
This study include. I'm the only American between 39 institutes from Europe, and it's 12.7 million euro. But my share is very small because I'm doing one part only. No. Yeah, smaller than that. But I mean, the idea here, they wanted to see the climate through the last millennium to see if there is climate change. So they are using tree ring, isotopes, sediment, ice cores, historical record, all these together in order to determine.
And do you see the CO2 in the tree rings? I mean,
Oh yeah.
How do you differentiate that? And
I will give you an example. There is one colleague of ours in Finland. He did a study. He took samples from Russia, near the border of Finland, and he took sample near the Russian border where there is a factory. Then he moved 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, and looked at the annual rings. And it's a very clear.
Can you differentiate between CO2 precipitation?
Oh yeah.
Annual ring growth?
Oh yeah. That's the reason when we are telling.
Because you relate it to climate data.
Right. Not only that, you need to have more side. When you have different side, let's say 1750, a dry year. Is this a dry year or something else? So you need, when you have many side, it will give you an exact idea if it's related to.
Like if you know that this was a dry year and you see relatively large rains,
that means could be another reason. Could be another reason. Because you see, when I'm talking, making my reconstruction, I'm explaining, for example, 50% of the variance. You see, there are other factors, and I cannot, it needs other people to do that. But 50%, that's great. I mean, it's an excellent relation.
Because of the add-on effect of rain, for example, carbon dioxide is abundant and rain is abundant, you get that larger rain. But if it's just carbon, it's a certain.
Yeah.
We can also relate the insect attacks in the forest with climate change.
Oh yeah.
There is any relationship between insect outburst and.
There are studies. There are studies. Actually, when I was doing my study in Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria is one of the most dangerous areas. I mean, the civil war through the last 10 years. They won't let anybody come in, I went there. I had a graduate student from there. He started contact me, and he said, we will provide you with the permit, everything. We went there was no permit, nothing, So we made a news conference, and after the news conference opened the door for us. But you know why they let me to sample? Because there was a dieback in the Cedrus atlantica.
There's a dieback in Morocco as well.
Yeah. They wanted to know what's the factors that influencing the dieback of the Cedrus. Oh yeah. And actually it was my interpretation. We didn't go further because the project ended. It was influencing more the old trees. And what was happening, a drought hit the area for 2, 3, 4 years. You get strong drought, hit those trees, maybe after the drought, it could be just drought. Those trees, the old trees will die. We saw the younger trees, there are trees growing well, but the huge dieback. And this dieback could be, after the drought, hit by insect. Then the trees doesn't have any more ability to fight, protect themselves from the insect. But the main factor that caused this is the drought.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.